Howdy, friends. Thank you for stopping by. This is the Lone Star Ranger, Book 1, The Outlaw, by Zane Grey. That night, Dwayne was not troubled by ghosts haunting his waking and sleeping hours. He awoke feeling bright and eager, and grateful to Euchre for putting something worthwhile into his mind. During breakfast, however, he was unusually thoughtful, working over the idea how much or how little he would confide in the old outlaw. He was aware of Euchre's scrutiny. "Well," began the old man, "at last. How'd you make out with the kid?" "The kid?" inquired Dwayne tentatively. "Jenny, I mean. What did you and she talk about?" "We had a little chat. You know you wanted me to cheer her up." Euchre sat with coffee cup poised and narrow eyes studying Dwayne. "Reckon you cheered her all right. What I'm afeared of is maybe you done the job too well." "How so?" "Well, when I went in to Jen last night, I thought she was plumb crazy. She was bursting with excitement, and the look in her eyes hurt me. She wouldn't tell me a darn word you said, but she hung onto my hands and showed every way without speaking how she wanted to thank me for bringing you over. Bucky, it was plain to me that you either gone to the limit or else you been kinda prodigal of cheer and hope. I'd hate to think you led Jenny to hope more'n you'd ever come true." Euchre paused, and as there seemed to be no reply forthcoming, he went on. "Buck, I've seen some outlaws whose word was good. Mine is. You can trust me. I trusted you, didn't I? Taking you over there and putting you wise to my trying to help the poor kid." Thus enjoined by Euchre, Dwayne began to tell the conversations with Jenny and Mrs. Bland word for word. Long before he had reached an end, Euchre sat down, the coffee cup, and began to stare, and at the conclusion the story in his face lost some of its red color, and beads of sweat stood out thickly on his brow. "Well, if that doesn't floor me," he said, blinking at Dwayne. "Young man, I figured you was some swift and sure to make your mark on this river, but I reckon I missed your real caliber. So that's what it means to be a man. Guess I forgot. Well, I'm old, and even if my heart was in the right place, I never was built for big stunts. Do you know what it'll take to do all you promised, Jen?" "I had no idea," replied Dwayne gravely. "You have to pull the wool over old Kate Bland's eyes, and even if she falls in love with you, which she's sure likely, that won't be easy, and she'd kill you in a minute, Buck, if she ever got wise. You ain't mistaken her none, are you?" "Not me, Euchre. She's a woman. I fear her more'n any man." "Well, you'll have to kill Bland and Chess Holloway and Rugg and maybe some others before you can ride off into the hills with that girl." "Why? Can't we plan to be nice to Mrs. Bland and then at the opportune time sneak off without any gunplay?" "Don't see how on earth," returned Euchre earnestly. "When Bland's away, he leaves all kinds of spies and scouts watching the valley trails. They all got rifles. You couldn't get by them. But when the boss is home, there's a difference. Only, of course, him and Chess keep their eyes peeled. They both stay home pretty much, except when they're playing monte or poker over at Benson's. So I say the best bet is to pick out a good time in the afternoon, drift over careless-like with a couple of hosses, choke Mrs. Bland or knock her on the head, take Jenny with you, and make a rush to get out of the valley. If you had luck, you might pull the stunt without throwing a gun, but I reckon best figuring would include dogging some lead and leaving at least Bland or Holloway dead behind you. I'm figuring, of course, that when come home and find out you're visiting Kate frequently, they'll just naturally look for results. Chess don't like you for no reason except you're swift on the draw. Maybe swifter than him. That's the hell of his gun-playing business. No one can ever tell who's swifter of two gunmen till they meet. The fact holds a fascination maybe you'll learn someday. Bland would treat you civil unless there was reason not to, and then don't believe he'd invite himself to a meeting with you. He'd set chess or rug to put you out of the way. Still, Bland's no coward, and if you come across him at a bad moment, you have to be quicker, and you was with Bossomer. All right, I'll meet what comes, said Dwayne quickly. The great point is to have horses ready and pick the right moment, then rush the trick through. That's the only chance for success, and you can't do it alone. I'll have to. I wouldn't ask you to help me, leave you behind. Well, I'll take my chances, replied Euclid gruffly. I'm going to help Jenny. You can gamble your last peso on that. There's only 4 men in this camp who would shoot me. Bland, his right-hand partners, and that rabbit-faced Benson. If you happen to put out Bland in chess, I'd stand a good show with the other 2. Anyway, I'm old and tired. What's the difference if I get plugged? I can risk as much as you, Buck, even if I am afraid of gunplay. You said correct. Hosses ready, the right minute, and rush the trick. That much settled. Now let's figure on a little details. They talked and planned. Truth in it was Euchre who planned, Dwayne who listened and agreed. While waiting the return of Bland as lieutenants, it would be well for Dwayne to grow friendly with the other outlaws, to sit in a few games of Monte or show willingness to spend a little money. The 2 schemers were to call upon Mrs. Bland every day. Euchre to carry message of cheer and warning to Jenny, Dwayne to blind the elder woman at any cost. These preliminaries decided upon, they proceeded to put them into action. No hard task was it to win friendship of the most good-natured outlaws. They were used to men of better order than theirs coming to hidden camps and sooner or later sinking to their lower level. Besides, with them everything was easy come, easy go. That was life itself, went on so carelessly and usually ended so cheaply. There were men among them, however, that made Dwayne feel that terrible, inexplicable wrath rise in his breast. He could not bear to be near them. He could not trust himself. He felt that any instant, a word, a deed, something might call too deeply to that instinct he could no longer control. Jackrabbit Benson was one of these men. Because of him and the other outlaws of his ilk, Dwayne could scarcely ever forget the reality of things. This, and because of that, there was always a charged atmosphere. The merriest, idlest, most careless moment might otherwise be terrible. And the terrible thing that Dwayne sensed was all of that. The valley was beautiful, sunny, fragrant, a place to dream in. The mountain tops were always blue or gold-rimmed. The yellow river slid slowly and majestically by. The birds sang in the cottonwoods, the horses grazed and pranced, children played, and women longed for love and freedom and happiness. The outlaws rode in and out, free with money and speech. They lived comfortably in their adobe homes, smoked, gambled, talked, laughed, while wound away all the hours and all the time life there was wrong, and the simplest moment might be precipitated by that evil into the most awful of contrasts. Dwayne felt rather than saw a dark, brooding shadow over the valley. Then, without any solicitation or encouragement from Dwayne, the Bland woman fell passionately in love with him. His conscience was never troubled about the beginning of that affair. She launched it herself. Took no great perspicuity on his part to see that. And the thing which evidently held her in check was the newness, the strangeness, and for the moment the all-satisfying fact of his respect for her. Dwayne exerted himself to please, to amuse, to interest, to fascinate her, and always with deference. That was his strong point, and it had made this part easy so far. He believed he could carry the whole scheme through without involving himself any deeper. He was playing a game at love, playing with life and death. Sometimes he trembled. Not that he feared Bland or Alloway or any other man. but the depths of life he'd come to see into. He was carried out of his old mood. Not once since this daring motive had stirred in him had he been haunted by that phantom of Bane beside his bed. Rather, he'd been haunted by Jenny's sad face, her wistful smile, and her eyes. He never was able to speak a word to her. What little communication he had with her was through Euchre, who shared short messages, but he caught glimpses of her every time he went to the Bland house. She contrived somehow to pass door or window to give him a look when chance afforded, and Dwayne discovered with surprise that these moments were more thrilling to him than any with Miss Bland. Often Dwayne knew Jenny was sitting just inside the window, and he felt inspired in his talk, and it was all made for her. So at least she came to know him, while as yet she was almost a stranger. Jenny had been instructed by Euchre to listen, to understand this was Dwayne's only chance to help keep her mind from constant worry, and to gather the import of every word which had double meaning. Euchre said that the girl had begun to wither under the strain, to burn up with intense hope which had flamed within her. But all the difference Dwayne could see was a paler face and darker, more wonderful eyes. The eyes seemed to be entreating him to hurry. The time was flying, that soon it might be too late. Then there was another meaning to him, a light, a strange fire, wholly inexplicable to Dwayne. It was only a flash, gone in an instant, but he remembered it because he had never seen it in any other woman's eyes. And although those waiting days he knew that Jenny's face, a specially warm, fleeting glance that she gave him, was responsible for subtle and gradual change in him. This change, he fancied, was only that through remembrance of her he got rid of his pale, sickening ghost. One day a careless Mexican threw a lighted cigarette up onto the brush matting that served as a ceiling on Benson's den, and there was a fire which left little more than adobe walls standing. The result was that while repairs were being made, there was no gambling and drinking. Time hung very heavily on the hands of some 20 outlaws. Days passed by without a brawl, and Bland's Valley saw more successful hours of peace than ever before. Dwayne, however, found the hours anything but empty. He spent more time at Mrs. Bland's. He walked miles on the trails leading out of the valley. He had care for the condition of his 2 horses. Upon his return from the latest of these tramps, Euchre suggested that they go down to the river to the boat landing. "Ferry couldn't run ashore this morning," said Euchre. "River getting low and sandbars making it hard for the horses. There's greaser freight wagons stuck in the mud, and I reckon we might hear news from the freighters. Bland's supposed to be in Mexico." Nearly all the outlaws in camps were assembled on the river bank, lolling in the shade of the cottonwoods. The heat was oppressive. Not an outlaw offered to help the freighters, who were trying to dig heavily freighted wagon out of the quicksand. Few outlaws would work for themselves, let alone they despised the Mexicans. Dwayne and Euchre joined the lazy group and sat down with him. Euchre lighted a black pipe and, drawing his hat over his eyes, lay back in the comfort after the manner of a majority of the outlaws. But Dwayne was alert, observing, thoughtful. He never missed anything. It was his belief that any moment an idle word might benefit to him. Moreover, these rough men were always interesting. "Bland's been chased across the river," said one. "New, he's delivering cattle to that Cuban ship," replied another. "Big deal on, hey?" "Some big. Rugg says the boss had an order for 15,000. Say, that'll take a year to fill." "New, Hardin is in cahoots with Bland. Between them, they'll fill orders bigger than that. Wonder what Hardin was rustling in here for." Dwayne could not possibly attend to all the conversations among the outlaws. He endeavored to get the drift of the talk nearest to him. "Kid Filler's going to cash," said a sandy-whiskered little outlaw. "So Jim was telling me. Blood poison, ain't it?" "Hole wasn't bad, but he took the fever," rejoined a comrade. "Deeger says the kid might pull through if he'd nurse him." "Well, Kate Bland ain't nursing any shot-up boys these days. She hasn't got time. A laugh followed this, Sally. Then came the penetrating silence. Some of the outlaw glanced good-naturedly at Duane. They bore him no ill will. Manifestly, they were aware of Mrs. Bland's infatuation. Pete, 'pears to me you said that before. Sure. Well, it's happened before. This remark drew louder laughter and more significant glances at Duane. He did not choose to ignore them any longer. Boys, poke all the fun you like at me, but don't mention any lady's name again. My hand is nervous and itchy these days. He smiled as he spoke, and his speech was drawled, but the good humor in no wise weakened it. Then his latter remark was significant to a class of men who, from inclination and necessity, practiced at gun drawing until they wore calluses and sore places on their thumbs, and calculated in very depths of their nervous organization a habit that made even the simplest and most common motion of the hand at or near the hip. There was something remarkable about a gunfighter's hand. It never seemed to be gloved, never to be injured, never out of sight or in an awkward position. There were grizzled outlaws in that group, some of whom had many notches on their gun handles, and they, with their comrades, according to Duane's silence, that carried conviction of regard in which he was held. Duane could not recall any other instance where he had let fall similar speech to these men, and certainly had never before hinted at his possibilities. He saw instantly that he could have done better. "Orful hot, ain't it?" remarked Bill Black presently. Bill could not keep quiet for long. He was a typical Texas desperado and never been nothing else. He was stoop-shouldered and bow-legged from much riding, a wiry little man, all muscle, with a square head, a hard face, partly black from scrubby beard and red from the sun, and a bright, roving, cruel eye. His shirt was open at the neck, showing a grizzle breast. "Is there any guy in this here outfit spot enough to go swimming?" he asked. "My God, Bill, you ain't going to wash!" exclaimed a comrade. This raised a laugh in which Black joined, but no one seemed eager to join him in a bath. "Laziest outfit I ever rustled with," went on Bill discontentedly. "Nothing to do. Say, if anybody wants to swim, maybe some of y'all gamble?" He produced a dirty pack of cards and waved them motionless at the crowd. "Bill, you're no good at cards," replied a lanky outlaw. "Now, Jasper, you say that powerful sweet, and you look sweet, or you might take it to heart," replied Black with a sudden change of tone. Here it was again, up-flashing passion. What Jasper saw fit to reply would mollify the outlaw, or it would not. There was an even balance. "No offense, Bill," said Jasper placidly without moving. Bill grunted and forgot Jasper, but he seemed restless and dissatisfied. Duane knew him to be an inveterate gambler, and as Benson's place was out of running order, Black was like a fish on dry land. "Well, if y'all afraid of the cards, what'll you bet on?" he asked in disgust. "Bill, I'll play you a game of mumbly pig for 2 bits," replied one. Black eagerly accepted. Betting him was a serious matter. The game obsessed him, not the stakes. He entered into the mumbly pig contest with thoughtful mien and corded brow. He won. Other comrades tried their luck with him and lost. Finally, when Bill had exhausted their supply of 2-bit pieces, or their desire for that particular game, he offered to bet on anything. "See that turtle dove over there?" he said, pointing. "I'll bet you at 1 stone or he won't. 5 pesos he'll fly or he won't fly when somebody chucks a stone. Who'll take me up?" That appeared to be more than the gambling spirit of several outlaws could withstand. "I'll take that. Easy money," said one. "Who's going to chuck a stone?" asked another. "Anybody," replied Bill. "Well, I bet I can scare him with 1 stone," said the first outlaw. "We're in on it, then." "Jim to fire the Darnick," chimed in the others. The money was put up, the stone down, the turtle dove took flight to the great joy of all the outlaws except Bill. "I bet y'all come back to the tree inside of 5 minutes, he offered imperturbably. Hereupon the outlaws did not show any laziness in their alacrity to cover Bill's money as it lay on the grass. Somebody had a watch, and they all sat down, dividing attention between the timepiece and the tree. The minutes dragged by to the accompaniment of various jocular remarks and net a fool and his money. When 4 3/4 minutes had passed, Turtle Dove alighted in the cottonwood. Then ensued an impressive silence while Bill calmly pocketed $50. "But it hadn't been the same dove," exclaimed Outlaw excitedly. "This one's smaller, dustier, not so purple." Bill eyed the speaker loftily. "Well, you have to catch the other one to prove that. Sabe, partner? Now I'll bet any gent here the 50 I won that I can scare that dove with one stone." No one offered to take his wager. "Well, then, I'll bet any of you even money that you can't scare him with one stone." Not proof against this chance, the outlaws made up a purse, in no wise disconcerted by Bill's contemptuous allusions to their banding together. The stone was thrown. The dove did not fly. Thereafter, in regard to the bird, Bill was unable to coax or scorn his comrades into any kind of wager. He tried them with a multiplicity of offers, and in vain. They appeared at loss for some unusual and seductive wager. Presently, a little ragged Mexican boy came along the river trail, particularly starved and poor-looking little fellow. Bill called him to him and gave him a handful of silver coins. Speechless, dazed, he went on his way, hugging the money. "I'll bet he drops some before he gets to the road," declared Bill. "I'll bet he runs. Hurry, you four-flush gamblers." Bill failed to interest any of his companions, and forthwith became sullen and silent. Strangely, his good humor departed in spite of the fact that he had won considerable. Duane, watching the disgruntled outlaw, marveled at him and wondered what was in his mind. These men were more variable than children, and unstable as water, and as dangerous as dynamite. "Bill, I'll bet you 10 you can't spill whatever's in that bucket that peon's packing," said the outlaw called Jim. Black's head came up with the action of a hawk about to swoop. Duane glanced back to the road, where he saw a crippled peon carrying a tin bucket toward the river. This peon was a half-witted Indian who lived in a shack and did odd jobs for the Mexicans. Duane had met him often. "Jim, I'll take you up on that," replied Black. Something, perhaps harshness in his voice, caused Duane to whirl. He caught leaping gleam in the outlaw's eye. "Oh, Bill, that's 2 for a shot," said Jasper, as Black rested an elbow on his knee and sighted over a long, heavy Colt. The distance to peon was about 50 paces, too far for even the most expert shot to hit a moving object so small as a bucket. Duane, marvelously keen in the alignment of sights, was positive that Black held too high. Another look at the hard face, now tense and dark with blood, confirmed Duane's suspicion that the outlaw was not aiming at the bucket at all. Duane leaped and struck the level gun out of his hand. Another outlaw picked it up. Black fell back astounded, deprived of his weapon. He did not seem the same man, or else he was cowed by Duane's significant and formidable front. Sullenly, he turned away without even asking for his gun. What a contrast, Duane thought. The evening of that day presented to his state of his soul. The sunset lingered in the golden glory over the distant Mexican mountains. Twilight came slowly. A faint breeze blew from the river, cool and sweet. The late cooing of a dove and the tinkle of a cowbell were the only sounds. A serene and tranquil peace lay over the valley. Inside Duane's body there was strife. This third facing of a desperate man had thrown him off his balance. It had not been fatal, but it threatened so much. The better side of his nature seemed to urge him to die rather than to go on fighting or opposing ignorant, unfortunate, savage men. But the perversity of him was so great that it dwarfed reason, conscience. He could not resist it. He felt something dying in him. He suffered. Hope seemed far away. Despair had seized upon him and was driving him into a reckless mood when he thought of Jenny. He had forgotten her. He had forgotten that he promised to save her. He had forgotten that he meant to snuff out as many lives as might stand between her and her freedom. The very remembrance sheared off his morbid introspection. She made a difference. How strange for him to realize that. He felt grateful to her. He'd been forced into outlawry. She had been stolen from her people and carried into captivity. They had met in the river fastness. He to instill hope in her despairing life, she to be the means, perhaps, of keeping him from sinking to the level of her captors. He became conscious of strong beating desire to see her, to talk with her. These thoughts had run through his mind while on his way to Mrs. Bland's house. He let Euchre go on ahead. He wanted more time to compose himself. Darkness had about set in when he reached his destination. There was no light in the house. Mrs. Bland was waiting for him on the porch. She embraced him, and the sudden, violent, unfamiliar contact sent such a shock through him that he all but forgot the deep game he was playing. She, however, in her agitation, did not notice his shrinking. From her embrace and the tender, incoherent words that flowed with it, he gathered that Euchre had acquainted her of his action with Black. "He might have killed you," she whispered more clearly, and if Duane had ever heard love in a voice, he heard it then. It softened him, after all. She was a woman, weak, fated for her nature, and unfortunate in her experience of life, doomed to unhappiness and tragedy. He made her advance so far that he returned the embrace and kissed her. Emotion such as she showed would have made any woman sweet, and she had a certain charm. It was easy, even pleasant, to kiss her, but Duane resolved that whatever her abandonment might become, he would not go further than the lie she made him act. "Buck, you love me?" she whispered. "Yes, yes," he burst out, eager to get it over. And even as he spoke, he caught the pale gleam of Jenny's face through the window. He felt ashamed. He was glad she could not see. Did she remember that she had promised not to misunderstand any of these actions? What did she think of him? Seeing him out there in the dusk with this bold woman in his arms, somehow the dim sight of Jenny's pale face, the big dark eyes, thrilled him, inspired him to his hard task of the present. "Listen, dear," he said to the woman, and he meant his words for the girl. "I'm going to take you away from this outlaw den if I have to kill Bill Bland, Alloway, Rugg, anybody who stands in my path. You were dragged here. You're good, I know it. There's happiness for you somewhere. A home among good people who care for you. Just wait till—" His voice trailed off and failed from excess of emotion. Kate Bland closed her eyes and leaned her head onto his breast, and Duane felt her heart beating against his, and conscience smote him a keen blow. If she loved him so much! But memory and understanding of her character hardened him again, and he gave her such commiseration as was due her sex, no more. "Boy, that's good of you," she whispered, "but it's too late. I'm done for. I can't leave Bland. All I ask is that you love me a little and stop your gun throwing." The moon had risen over the eastern bulge of the dark mountain. Now the valley was flooded with mellow light, and shadows of cottonwoods wavered against the silver. Suddenly the clip-clop of hooves caused Duane to raise his head and listen. Horses were coming down the road from the head of the valley. The hour was unusual for riders to come in. Presently the narrow moonlit lane was crossed as its far end by black moving objects. 2 horses, Duane discerned. "It's Bland," whispered the woman, grasping Duane with her shaking hands. "You must run." "No, he'd see you. That'd be worse." "It's Bland. I know his horse's trot." "But you said he wouldn't mind me calling here," protested Duane. "Euchre's with me. It'll be all right." "Maybe so," she replied, with visible effort at self-control. Manifestly, she had a great fear of Bland. "If I could only think—" Then she dragged Duane to the door and pushed him in. "Euchre, come out with me. Duane, you stay with the girl. I'll tell Bland you're in love with her. Jen, if you give us away, I'll wring your neck. The swift action and fierce whisper told Dwayne that Mrs. Bland was herself again. Dwayne stepped close to Jenny, stood near the window. Neither spoke, but her hands were outstretched to meet his own. They were small, trembling hands, cold as ice. He held them close, trying to convey what he felt, that he would protect her. She leaned against him, and they looked out of the window. Dwayne felt calm and sure of himself. His most pronounced feeling besides that for his frightened girl was curiosity as to how Mrs. Bland would rise to the occasion. He saw the riders dismount down the lane and wearily come forward. A boy led away the horses. Euchre, the old fox, was talking loud and with remarkable ease, considering what he claimed was his natural cowardice. That was way back in the 60s, about time of war, he was saying. Rustling cattle was nothing then to what it is now, anyway. And times rougher than these days. Gun throwing has come to be a disease. Men have an inch for the draw as they used to have for poker. The only real gambler outside of greasers we ever had here was Bill, and I presume Bill's burning now. The approaching outlaws, hearing voices, halted a rod or so from the porch. Then Mrs. Bland uttered an exclamation, ostensibly meant to express surprise, and hurried out to meet him. She was greeted by her husband warmly and gave welcome to the other men. Dwayne could not see well enough in the shadow to recognize Bland's companion, but he believed it was Alloway. Dog tired and we're starved, said Bland heavily. Who's here with you? That's Euchre on the porch. Dwayne's inside at the window with Jen, replied Mrs. Bland. Dwayne, he exclaimed. Then he whispered low, something Dwayne couldn't catch. Why, I asked him to come, said the chief's wife. She spoke easily and naturally and made no change in tone. Jen's been ailing. She's got thinner and whiter every day. Dwayne came here one day with Euchre, saw Jen, and went loony over her pretty face, same as all you men, so I let him come in. Bland cursed low and deep under his breath. The other man made violent action of some kind and apparently was quieted by a restraining hand. Kate, you let Dwayne make love to Jenny? Queried Bland incredulously. Yes, I did, replied the wife stubbornly. Why not? Jen's in love with him. If he takes her away and marries her, she can be a decent woman. Bland kept silent for a moment, then his laugh paled out loud and harsh. Chester, you get that? Well, by God. What do you think of my wife? She's lying or she's crazy, replied Alloway, and his voice carried an unpleasant ring. Mrs. Bland promptly and indignantly told her husband's lieutenant to keep his mouth shut. Ho, 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 rolled Bland's laugh. Then he led away to the porch, his spurs clinking, the weapons he was carrying rattling, and he flopped them down the bench. How are you, boss? asked Euchre. Hello, old man. I'm well, but all in. Alloway slowly walked to the porch and leaned against the rail. He answered Euchre's greeting with a nod, and he stood there in the dark, a silent figure. Mrs. Bland's full voice and eager questioning had a tendency to ease the situation. Bland replied briefly to her, reporting a remarkably successful trip. Dwayne thought it time to show himself. He had a feeling that Bland Alloway would get him to go for the moment. They were plainly nonplussed, and Alloway seemed sullen, brooding. Jenny whispered, Dwayne, that was clever of Mrs. Bland. We'll keep up deception any day now. Be ready. She pressed close to him, barely audible. Hardy came breathing into his ear. Good night, Jenny, he said out loud. Hope you feel better tomorrow. Then he stepped out into the moonlight and spoke. Bland returned the greeting, and though he was not amiable, he did not show any resentment. Met Jasper as I rode in, said Bland presently. He told me you made Bill Black mad, and there's liable to be a fight. What do you go off the handle about? Dwayne explained the incident. I'm sorry it happened to be there, he went on. It wasn't my business. Scurvy trick that had been, muttered Bland. You did right. All the same, Dwayne, why don't you stop quarreling with the men? If you're one of us, that'd be different. I can't keep my men from fighting, but I'm not called on to let an outsider hang around my camp and plug my rustlers. I guess I'll have to be hitting the trail for somewhere, said Dwayne. Why not join my band? You've got a bad start already, Dwayne. If If you know this border, you'll never be a respectable citizen again. You're a born killer. I know every bad man on this frontier. More than one of them have told me that something exploded in their brain, and when sense came back, there lay another dead man. It's not so with me. I've done a little shooting too, but I never wanted to kill another man just to rid myself of the last one. My dead men don't sit on my chest at night. That's the gunfighter's trouble. He's crazy. He has to kill a new man. He's driven to forget the last one. But I'm no gunfighter, protested Dwayne. Circumstances made me— No doubt, interrupted Bland with a laugh. Circumstances made me a rustler. You don't know yourself. You're young, you've got a temper, and your father's one of the most dangerous men Texas ever had. I don't see any other career for you instead of going it alone. A lone wolf, as the Texans say. Why not make friends with other outlaws? You live longer. Euchre squirmed in his seat. Boss, I've been giving the boy exactly the same line of talk. That's why I took him in to bunk with me. If he makes pards among us, there won't be any more trouble, and he'd be a grand feller for the gang. I've seen Wild Bill Hickok throw a gun, and Billy the Kid, and Hardin, and Chess here. All the fast men on the border. And with apologies to present company, I'm here to say Dwayne has them all skinned. His draw's different. You can't even see how he does it. Euchre's admiring praise served to create an effective little silence. Alloway shifted uneasily on his feet, his spurs jingling faintly, and he did not lift his head. Bland seemed thoughtful. That's about the only qualification I have to make eligible for your band, said Dwayne, easily. It's good enough, replied Bland shortly. Will you consider the idea? I'll think it over. Good night. He left the group, followed by Euchre. When they reached the end of the lane, and before they exchanged a word, Bland called Euchre back. Dwayne proceeded slowly along the moonlit road to the cabin and sat down under the cottonwoods to wait for Euchre. The night was intense and quiet, a low hum of insects giving the effect of the congestion of life. The beauty of the soaring moon, the ebony canyons of shadow under the mountain, the melancholy serenity of the perfect night made Dwayne shudder in the realization of how far aloof he now was from enjoyment of these things. Never again, so long as he lived, could he be natural. His mind was clouded. His eye and ear henceforth must register impressions of nature, but the joy of them had fled. Still, as he sat there with a foreboding and of more and darker work ahead for him, there was yet a strange sweetness left to him, and it lay in the thought of Jenny. The pressure of her cold little hands lingered in his. He did not think of her as a woman, and he did not analyze his feelings. He just had vague, dreamy thoughts and imaginations that were interspread in the constant and stern revolving of plans to save her. A shuffling step roused him. Euchre's dark figure came crossing the moonlight grass under the cottonwoods. The moment the outlaw reached him, Dwayne saw that he was laboring under great excitement. It scarcely affected Dwayne. He seemed to be acquiring patience, calmness, and strength. Bland kept you pretty long, he said. Wait till I get my breath, replied Euchre. He sat silent a little while, fanning himself with a sombrero. Thought the night was cool, and he went into the cabin to return presently with a lighted pipe. Fine night, he said, and his tone further acquainted Dwayne with Euchre's quaint humor. Fine night for love affairs, by gum. I noticed that, rejoined Dwayne dryly. Well, I'm a son of a gun. If I didn't stand and watch Bland choke his wife till her tongue stuck out and she got black in the face. No, exclaimed Dwayne. Hope to die if I didn't. Buck, listen to this here yarn. When I got back to the porch, I seen Bland was waking up. He'd been too tuckered out to figure out much. Alloway and Kate had gone in the house where they lit the lamps. I heard Kate's voice high, but Alloway never chirped. He's not the talking kind. He's damn dangerous when he's that way. Bland asked me some questions right from the shoulder. I was ready for him, and I swore the moon was green cheese. He was satisfied. Bland always trusts me, and he liked me too, I reckon. I hated to lie black that way, but Hard man with bad intentions towards Jenny, and I'd double-cross him any day. Then we went into the house. Jenny had gone to her little room, and Bland called her to come out. She said she was undressed and ordered her to put her clothes back on. Then Buck, his next move was something surprising. He deliberately thronged a gun on Kate. Yes, sir, he pointed his big blue Colt right at her. He said, "I have a mind to blow your brains out." "Go ahead," said Kate, cool as can be. "You lied to me," he roars. Kate laughed in his face. Bland slammed the gun down, made a grab for her. She fought him, but wasn't much a match for him. He got her by the throat. He choked her till I thought she was strangled. Alloway made him stop. She flopped down on the bed and gasped for a while, and when she came to, them hard-shelled cusses went after her, trying to make her give herself away. I think Bland was jealous. He suspected she got thick with you and was fooling around. I reckon it's a sore feeling for a man to have. Yes, pretty nice, but not to be sure. Bland gave it up after a while, and then he cussed and raved at her. One saying of his worth pinning in your sombrero and ain't nothing to kill a man. I don't need much for that, but I want to know, you hussy. Then he went in and dragged poor Jen out. She had time to dress. She was so mad he hurt her sore leg. You know, Jen got that injury fighting off one of them devils in the dark. When I seen Bland twist her, hurt her, I had a queer, hot feeling deep down in me, and for only time in my life I wished I was a gunfighter. Well, Jen amazed me. She was whiter than a sheet, and her eyes were big and starry, but she had nerve. First time I ever seen her show any. Jenny said, "My wife said Dwayne came over here to see you. I believe she's lying. I think she's been carrying on with him, and I want to know. If she's been and you tell me the truth, I'll let you go. I'll send you to Huntsville where you can communicate with your friends. I'll give you money." That must have been a hell of a minute for Kate Bland. If I ever seen death in a man's eyes, I seen it in Bland's. He loves her. That's the strange part of it. "Has Dwayne been coming here to see my wife?" Bland asked fierce-like. "No," said Jenny. "He's been after you?" "Yes." "Has he fallen in love with you?" Kate said that. I don't know. He hadn't told me." "But you're in love with him?" "Yes," she said. "And, Buck, if you only could have seen her. She thronged up her head, and her eyes were full of fire. Bland seemed dazed at the sight of her. And Alloway, why, that little skunk of an outlaw cried right out. He was hit plumb center. He's in love with Jenny. And the look of her then was enough to make any feller quit. He just slunk out of the room. I told you maybe that he'd been trying to get Bland to marry Jen to him, so even though, like Alloway, can love a woman. Bland stamped up and down the room. He sure was dying hard. "Jenny," he said, one more turning to her. "You swear, in fear of your life, you're telling truth. Kate's not in love with Dwayne." "She let him come to see you? There's been nothing between them?" "No, I swear," said Jenny. Bland sat down like a man licked. "Go to bed, you white-faced." Bland choked on some other word. "A bad one, I reckon." He positively shook in his chair. Jenny went then, and Kate began to have hysterics, and your Uncle Euchre ducked his nut out of the door and come home. Dwayne did not have a word to say at the end of Euchre's long harangue. He experienced relief. As a matter of fact, he had expected a good deal worse. He thrilled at the thought of Jenny perjuring herself to save that abandoned woman. What mysteries these feminine creatures were. "Well, there's where our little deal stands now," resumed Euchre, meditatively. "You know, Buck, as well as me, that if you been some feller who hadn't shown he was a wonder with a gun, you'd be full of lead by now. If you'd happened to kill Bland and Alloway, I reckon you'd be as safe on this here border as you would in Santone. Such is gun fame in the land of the draw." Both men were awake early, silent with premonition of the trouble ahead, thoughtful of fact the time for the long-planned action was at hand. It was remarkable that a man as loquacious as Euchre could hold his tongue so long. This was significant of the deadly nature of the intended deed. During breakfast, he said a few words customary in service of food. At the conclusion of the meal, he seemed to come to the end of the deliberation. "Buck, the sooner the better now," he declared with a glint in his eye. "The more time we use up now, the less we surprise Bland." "I'm ready when you are," replied Duane quietly, and he rose from the table. "We'll saddle up, then," Euchre went on gruffly. "Tie them 2 packs on I made, one for each saddle. You can't tell, maybe either hoss will be carrying double. It's good they're both big, strong hosses." "Guess that wasn't a wise move of your uncle, Euchre's, bringing in your hosses and having them ready." "Euchre, I hope you're not going to get in bad here. I'm afraid you are. Let me do the rest now," said Duane. The outlaw eyed him sarcastically. "That'd be terrible now, wouldn't it? If you want to know why I'm in bad already, I didn't tell you that Alloway called me in last night, and he's getting wise pretty quick." "Euchre, you going with me?" queried Duane, suddenly divining the truth. "Well, I reckon, either to hell or safe over the mountain. I wish I was a gunfighter. I hate to leave here without taking a peg at Jackrabbit Benson now. Buck, you do some hard figuring while I go nosing around. It's pretty early, which is all the better." Euchre put on his sombrero, and as he went out, Duane saw that he wore a gun and cartridge belt. It was the first time Duane had ever seen the outlaw armed. Duane packed his few belongings into his saddlebag and carried the saddlebags out to the corral. An abundance of alfalfa in the corral showed that the horses had fared well. They had almost gotten fat during his stay in the valley. He watered them, put on the saddles, loosely cinched, and then the bridles. His next move was to fill the 2 canvas water bottles. That done, he returned to the cabin to wait. At the moment, he felt no excitement or agitation of any kind. There was no more thinking or planning to do. The hour had arrived, and he was ready. He understood perfectly the desperate chances he must take. His thoughts became confined to Euchre and surprising loyalty and goodness in the hardened old outlaw. Time passed slowly. Duane kept glancing at his watch. He hoped to start the thing and get away before the outlaws were out of bed. Finally, he heard the shuffle of Euchre's boot on the hard path, and the sound quicker than usual. Euchre came round the corner of the cabin. Duane was not so astounded as he was concerned to see the outlaw white and shaking, sweat dripping from him. He had a wild look. "Luck ours so fur, Buck," he panted. "You don't look it," replied Duane. "I'm terrible sick. Just killed a man. First one I ever killed." "Who?" asked Duane, startled. "Jackrabbit Benson. And as sick as I am, I'm glorying in it. I went nosing round up the road, saw Alloway going into Deggers. He's thick with the Deggers. Reckon he's asking questions. Anyway, I was sure glad to see him away from Bland's, and he didn't see me. When I dropped into Benson, there wasn't nobody there but Jackrabbit and some greasers, and he's starting to work. Benson never had no use for me, and he up and said he wouldn't give a 2-bit piece for my life, and I asked him why. "You're double-crossing the boss in chess," he said. "Jack, what'd you give for your own life?" I asked him. He straightened up and surprised, mean-looking. I let him have it, plumb center. He wilted, and the greasers run. I reckon I'll never sleep again, but I had to do it. Duane asked if the shot attracted any attention outside. "I didn't see nobody but greasers, and I sure looked sharp. Coming back, I cut across through the cottonwoods past Bland's cabin. I meant to keep out of sight, but somehow I had an idea to find out if Bland was awake yet. Sure enough, I run plumb into Beppo, the boy who tends to Bland's horses. Beppo likes me, and when I inquired of his boss, said Bland had been up all night fighting with the Senora. And Buck, here's how I figure. Bland couldn't let up last night. He was sore. And he went after Kate again, trying to wear her down. Just as likely he might have went after Jenny with worse intentions. Anyway, he and Kate must have had it hot and heavy. We're pretty lucky." "It seems so. Well, I'm going," said Duane. Lucky I should. Smiler Bland's been up all night after most dragging home. He'll be tuckered out this morning, sleepy, sore. He won't be expecting hell before breakfast. Now, you walk over to his house, meet him how you like. That's your game. I'm suggesting if he comes out at you to parley, you can just say you thought over his proposition and was ready to join his band, or you ain't. You'll have to kill him. And I'd save time to go for your gun on sight. Might be wise, too, for it's likely he'll do the same. How about the hosses? I'll fetch 'em and come along about 2 minutes behind you. 'Pears to me you ought to have the job done and Jenny outside by the time I get there. Once on them hosses, we can ride out of camp for Outlaw or anybody gets into action. Jenny ain't much heavier than a rabbit. That big black will carry you both. All right, but once more let me persuade you to stay, not to mix any more in this, said Duane earnestly. Nope, I'm going. You heard what Benson told me. Alloway wouldn't give me the benefit of any doubts. Buck, a last word. Look out for that Bland woman. Duane merely nodded, and then seeing that the horses were ready, he strode away through the grove. Accounting for the short cut across the grove and field, it was about 5 minutes' walk up to Bland's house. To Duane it seemed a long time, and in the distance, and he had difficulty in restraining his pace. As he walked there came a gradual and subtle change in his feelings. Again, he was going out to meet a man in conflict. He could have avoided this meeting, but despite the fact of his courting the encounter, he had not as yet felt that hot, inexplicable rush of blood. The motive of his deadly action was not personal, and somehow that made a difference. No outlaws were in sight. He saw several Mexican herders with cattle. Blue columns of smoke curled up over the cabins, and the fragrant smell of it reminded Duane of his home and cutting wood for the stove. He noted a cloud of creamy mist rising above the river, dissolving in the sunlight. Then he entered Bland's lane. While yet some distance from the cabin, he heard the loud, angry voices of a man and a woman. Bland and Kate still quarreling. He took a quick survey of the surrounding. There was now not even a Mexican in sight. Then he hurried a little. Halfway down the lane, he turned his head to peer through the cottonwoods. This time he saw Euchre coming with the horses. There was no indication that the old outlaw might lose his nerve in the end. Duane had feared this. Duane now changed his walk to a leisurely saunter. He reached the porch and then distinguished what was inside the cabin. If you do, Blaine, heaven I'll fix you and her. That was panted out by Keith Bland's full voice. Let me loose her. I'm going in there, I tell you, replied Bland hoarsely. What for? I want to make a little love to her, ha-ha. It'll be fun to have a laugh on her new lover. You lie, cried Keith Bland. I'm not saying what I'll do to her afterward. His voice grew hoarser with passion. Let me go now. No, I won't let you go. You'll choke the truth out of her. You kill her. The truth, hissed Bland. Yes, I lied. Jen lied. But she lied to save me. You needn't murder her for that. Bland cursed horribly. Then followed a wrestling sound of bodies and violent straining against contact. Scrape of feet, jangle spurs, crash, sliding table and chair. The cry of a woman in pain. Duane stepped into the open door. Inside the room, Kate Bland lay half across the table where she had been flung, and she was trying to get to her feet. Bland's back was turned. He had opened door to Jenny's room and had one foot across the threshold. Duane caught the girl's low, shuddering cry. Then he called out loud and clear. With cat-like fleetness, Bland wheeled, then froze on the threshold. His sight, quick as his action, caught Duane's menacing, unmistakable position. Bland's big frame filled the door. He was in bad place to reach for his gun, but he would not have time for a step. Duane read in his eyes the desperate calculation for chances. For a fleeting instant, Bland shifted his glance to his wife. Then his whole body seemed to vibrate with the swing of an arm. Duane shot him. He fell forward, his gun exploding as it hit the floor and dropped loose from his stretched fingers. Duane stood over him, stooped to turn him on his back. Bland looked up with a clouded gaze and gasped his last. "Dwayne, you killed him," cried Kate Bland huskily. "I knew you'd have to." She staggered against the wall, her eyes dilating, her strong hands clenching, her face slowly whitening. She appeared shocked, half stunned, but showed no grief. "Jenny," called Dwayne sharply. "Oh, Dwayne," came a halting reply. "Yes, come out, hurry." She came out with uneven steps, seeing only him, and she stumbled over to Bland's body. Dwayne caught her arm, swung her behind him, and feared the woman when she realized now she'd been duped. His action was protective, and his movement toward the door equally significant. "Dwayne!" cried Mrs. Bland. It was no time for talk. Dwayne edged on, keeping Jenny behind him. At the moment, there was a pounding of iron-shod hooves out the lane. Kate Bland bounded to the door. When she turned back, her amazement was changing to realization. "Where are you taking Jen?" she cried, her voice like a man's. "Get out of my way," replied Dwayne. His look, perhaps without speech, was enough for her. In an instant, she was transformed into fury. "You hound! All the time you were fooling me. You made love to me. You let me believe, and you swore you loved me. Now I see what's weird about you. All for that girl. But you can't have her. You'll never leave here alive. Give me that girl. Let me get at her. She'll never win any more men in this camp." She is a powerful woman. It took all Dwayne's strength to ward off her onslaught. She clawed at Jenny over his upheld arm. Every second her fury increased. "Help, help, help," she shrieked in a voice that must have penetrated the remotest cabin in the valley. Let go, cried Dwayne in a low, sharp voice, and still he held his gun in his right hand, and it began to be hard for him to ward off the woman. His coolness had gone with her shriek and for help. "Let go," he repeated, and he shoved her fiercely. Suddenly, she snatched a rifle off the wall and backed away, her strong hands fumbling at the lever as she jerked it down, throwing a shell into the chamber and cocking the weapon. Dwayne leaped on her. He struck up the rifle as it went off, and the powder burned in his face. "Jenny, run out. Get on a horse," he said. Jenny flashed out of the door. With an iron grasp, Dwayne held onto the barrel rifle. He had grasped it with his left hand and gave such a pull that swung the crazed woman off the floor, but he could not lose her grip. She was strong as could be. "Kate, let go." He tried to intimidate her. She did not see his gun thrust into her face, or reason had given way to such an extent to passion that she did not care. She cursed. Her husband had used the same curses, and from her lips they seemed strange, unsexed, more deadly. Like a tigress, she fought him. Her face no longer resembled a woman's. That evil, that outlaw life, the wildness, the rage, meaning to kill, was even in such a moment terribly impressed upon Dwayne. He heard a cry from outside, a man's cry, hoarse and alarming. Made him think of lost time. The demon of woman might yet block his plan. "Let go," he whispered, and he felt his lips stiffen. The grimness of that instant, he relaxed his hold on the barrel rifle. When sudden, redoubled, irresistible strength, he wrenched the rifle down and discharged it. Dwayne felt the blow, a shock, burning agony tearing through his chest. Then in a frenzy, he jerked so powerfully upon the rifle he threw the woman against the wall. She fell and seemed stunned. Dwayne leaped back, whirled, flew out of the door to the porch. The sharp cracking of a gun halted him. He saw Jenny holding to the bridle of his bay horse. Euchre was astride the other, and he had a Colt leveled and was firing down the lane. Then came a single shot, heavier, and Euchre ceased. He fell from the horse. A swift glance back showed to Dwayne a man coming down the lane. It was Outlaw. His gun was smoking. He broke into a run. Then in an instant he saw Dwayne and tried to check his pace, and he swung up his arm. But that slight pause was fatal. Dwayne shot, and Outlaw was falling when his gun went off. His bullet whistled close to Dwayne and thudded into the cabin. Dwayne bounded down to the horses, and Jenny was trying to hold the plunging bay. Euchre lay flat on his back, dead, a bullet hole in his shirt, his face set hard, and his hands twisted around gun and bridle. "Jenny, you've nerve, all right," cried Dwayne as he dragged the horse down she was holding. "Up with you now. There, never mind. Long stirrups. Hang on somehow." He caught his bridle out of Euchre's clutching grip and leaped astride. The frightened horses jumped into a run and thundered down the lane down the road. Dwayne saw men running from cabins. He heard shouts, but there were no shots fired. Jenny seemed able to stay on her horse, but without stirrups, she was thrown about so much that Dwayne rode closer and reached out to grasp her arm. Thus, they rode through the valley to the trail that led up and over the steep broken rim rock. As it began to climb, Dwayne looked back. No pursuers were in sight. "Jenny, we're going to get away," he cried, exultation in her voice. She was gazing horror-stricken at his breast as he was turning to look back, and he faced her. "Dwayne, your shirt's all bloody," she faltered, pointing with trembling fingers. With her words, Dwayne became aware of two things. The hand he instinctively placed to his breast still held his gun, and he had sustained a terrible wound. Dwayne had been shot through the breast far enough down to give him grave apprehension of his life. The clean-cut hole made the bullet bled freely, both at its entrance and where it had come out, but with no signs of hemorrhaging. He did not bleed at the mouth. However, he began to cough up reddish-tinged foam. As they rode on, Jenny, with pale face and mute lips, looked at him. "I'm badly hurt, Jenny," he said, "but I guess I'll stick it out." "Did he shoot you?" "Yes, she was a devil. Euchre told me to look out for her, but I wasn't quick enough." "You didn't have to," shivered the girl. Nah, he replied. They didn't stop climbing while Dwayne tore scarf off and made a compress, which he bound tightly over his wounds. The fresh horses made fast time up the rough trail. From the open places, Dwayne looked down. When he surmounted the steep ascent, he stood on top of the rim rock with no signs of pursuit down the valley, and with wild broken fastness before them, Dwayne turned to the girl and assured her that they now had every chance of escape. But your wound," she faltered, with dark, troubled eyes. "I see the blood dripping from your back." "Jenny, I'll take a lot of killing," he said. Then he became silent and attended to the uneven trail. He was aware presently that he had not come into Bland's camp by this route, but that didn't matter. Any trail leading out beyond the rim rock was safe enough. What he wanted was to get far enough away into some wild retreat where he could hide till he recovered from this wound. He seemed to feel a fire inside his breast, and his throat burned so that it was necessary for him to take a swallow of water every little bit of while. He began to suffer considerable pain, which increased as the hours went by and then gave way to numbness. From that time on, he had need of his great strength and endurance. Gradually, he lost his steadiness and his keen sight, and he realized if they were to meet foes, if somebody was pursuing or should come up on him, he would only make a very poor stand. So he turned off the trail and appeared seldom traveled. Soon after this move, he became conscious of a further thickening of his senses. He felt able to hold on to his saddle for a while longer, but he was failing. Then he thought he ought to advise Jenny, so in case she was left alone, she could have some idea what to do. "Jenny, I'm going to give out soon," he said. "No, I don't mean what you think, but I'm going to drop soon. My strength's going. If I die, you ride back to the main trail. Hide, rest by day, ride at night. That trail goes to water. I believe you get across the Nueces, where some ranch will take you in." Dwayne could not get the meaning of her incoherent reply. He rode on, and soon he could not see the trail or hear his horse. He did not know whether they traveled a mile or many miles that far. But he was conscious, and when his horse stopped, he had a vague sense of falling off and feeling Jenny's arms before everything went dark. When consciousness returned, he found himself lying in a hut of mesquite and branches. It was well built and evidently some years old. There were two doors or openings, one in front and the other in back. Dwayne imagined it had been built by a fugitive, one who meant to keep an eye on both ways and not to be surprised. Dwayne felt weak and had no desire to move. Where was he anyway? A strange and tangible sense of time, distance, and something far behind weighed on him. Sight of the two packs Euchre had made brought his thought to Jenny. What had become of her? There was evidence of her work in a smoldering fire in a little blackened coffee pot. Probably she was outside looking after the horses or getting water, he thought. He heard a step, and he listened, but he felt tired. Presently his eyes were closed, and he fell into a doze. Wakening from this, he saw Jenny sitting beside him. In some ways she seemed to have changed. When he spoke, she gave him a start and turned eagerly to him. "Dwayne," she cried. "Hello. How are you, Jenny?" "How am I?" he said, finding it a little difficult to talk. "I'm all right," she replied, "and you've come to your wounds healed, but you've been sick. Fever, I guess. I did all I could." Dwayne saw now the difference in her was the whiteness and tightness of her skin, the hollowness of eye, and a look of strain. "Fever? How long have we been here?" he asked. She took some pebbles from the crown of his sombrero and counted them. 9 days, she answered. 9 days, he exclaimed incredulously. But another look at her assured him that she meant what she said. "I've been sick all that time? You nursed me?" "Yes." "Bland's men didn't come along here?" "No." "Where are the horses?" "I keep them grazing down in a gorge back of here. There's good grass and water." "Have you slept any?" "A little. Lately I couldn't keep awake." "Good Lord, I should think not. You've had a time of sitting here day and night nursing me, watching for outlaws. Come on, tell me all about it." "Nothing much to tell." "I want to know anyway, just what you did, how you felt." "I can't remember very well," she replied. "We must have ridden 40 miles that day we got away. You bled the whole time. Toward evening you lay on your horse's neck, and when we came to this place, you fell off the saddle. I dragged you in here and stopped your bleeding. Thought you'd die that night, but in the morning I had a little hope. I had forgotten the horses, but luckily they didn't stray far. I caught them and kept them down the gorge. When your wounds closed and you began to breathe stronger, I thought you'd get well quick. It was fever that put you back. You raved a lot, and that worried me because I couldn't stop you. Anybody trailing us could have heard you good a ways. I don't know whether I was scared most then or when you was quiet. It was so dark and lonely and still all around. Every day I put a stone in your hat." "Jenny, you saved my life," said Dwayne. "I don't know. Maybe. I did all I knew how to do," she replied. "You saved mine more than my life." Their eyes met in a long gaze, and then their hands in close clasp. "Jenny, we're going to get away," he said with gladness. "I'll be well in a few days. You don't know how strong I am. We'll hide by day and travel by night. I can get you across the river." "And then?" she asked. "We'll find some honest rancher." "And then?" she persisted. "Why," he began slowly, "that's as far as my thoughts ever got. It's pretty hard, I tell you, to assure yourself of so much. It means your safety. You tell your story, you'll be sent home to some village or town to be taken care of until a relative or friend is notified." "And you?" she inquired in a strange voice. Dwayne kept silent. "What will you do?" she went on. "Jenny, I'll go back to the breaks. I daren't show off my face to respectable people. I'm an outlaw." "You're no criminal," she declared with deep passion. "Jenny, on this border there's little difference between an outlaw and a criminal. It doesn't count for much." "You won't go back among those terrible men. Your gentleness, your sweetness, all that's good about you. Dwayne, don't go." "I can't go back with the outlaws, at least not Bland's man. No, I'll go it alone. I'll low wolf it. That's what they say on the border. What else can I do, Jenny?" "Oh, I don't know. Couldn't you hide? Couldn't you slip off to Texas or go far away?" "I could never get out of Texas without being arrested. I could hide, but a man must live. Never mind about me, Jenny." In 3 days, Dwayne was able with great difficulty to mount his horse. During daylight, by short relays, he and Jenny rode back to the main trail where they hid again till he had rested, and then in the dark they rode out the canyons and gullies of the rim rock, and early in the morning they halted at first water to camp. From that point, they traveled after nightfall and went into hiding during the day. Once across the Nueces River, Dwayne was assured of safety for her and great danger for himself. They had crossed into a country he did not know. Somewhere east of the river, there were scattered ranches, but he was liable to find a rancher in touch with outlaws as he was likely to find one honest. Dwayne hoped his good fortune would not desert him in this last service to Jenny. Next to worry of that was realization of his condition. He'd gotten up too soon, he'd ridden too far and too hard, and now he felt that at any moment he could fall from the saddle. At least far ahead, over a barren mesquite-dotted stretch-dust ground, he spied a patch of green and a little flat ranch house. He headed his horse for it and turned to face. He tried to make it cheerful for Jenny's sake. She seemed both happy and sorry. When near at hand, he saw the rancher was a thrifty farmer, and thrift spoke for honesty. There were fields of alfalfa, fruit trees, corrals, windmill pumps, irrigation ditches, all surrounding a neat little adobe house. Some children were playing in the yard. The way they ran at sight of Dwayne hinted both of loneliness and fear of their isolated lives. Dwayne saw a woman come to the door, and then a man. The latter looked keenly, then stepped outside. He was a sandy-haired, freckled Texan. "Howdy, stranger," he called to Dwayne, halted, and "Get down, you and your woman. Say now, are you sick or shot or what?" Dwayne, reeling in his saddle, bent, searching eyes upon the rancher. He thought he saw good, well, kindness, honesty. He risked all in that one sharp glance. Then he almost plunged from the saddle. The rancher caught him and helped him to a bench. "Martha, come out here," he called. "This man's sick." "No, he's shot." "I don't know, got blood stains." Jenny had slipped off her horse to Dwayne's side when he appeared about to faint. "Are you his wife?" asked the rancher. "No, I'm only a girl he saved from outlaws." "Oh, he's so paler." Dwayne, Buck Dwayne," exclaimed the rancher excitedly. "The man who killed Bland and Alloy? I owe him a good turn, and I'll pay it, young woman." The rancher's wife came out and manner at once kind and practical essayed to make Dwayne drink from a flask. He was not so far gone that he could not recognize its contents, which he refused and weakly asked for water. When it was given to him, he found his voice. "Yes, I'm Dwayne. I've only overdone myself, just all in. The wounds I got at Bland's are healing. Will you take this girl in, hide her a while till the excitement's over among the outlaws?" "I sure will," replied the Texan. "Thanks. I'll remember you. I'll square it." "What are you going to do?" I'll rest a bit, and then I'll go back to the breaks." "Young man, you ain't in any shape to travel. See here, any rustles on your trail?" "I think we gave Bland's gang the slip." "Good. I'll tell you what. I'll take you in along with the girl and hide both of you till you get well. It'll be safe. There's some neighbors 5 miles off. We don't get much company." "You risk a great deal. Both outlaws and rangers are hunting me," said Dwayne. "Never seen a ranger yet, not in these parts. Have always got along with outlaws, maybe excepting Bland. I'll tell you, I owe you a good turn." My horses might betray you," added Dwayne. "I'll hide them in a place where there's water and grass. Nobody goes to it. Come on now, let me help you indoors." Dwayne's last fading sensations of that hard day were the strange feel of a bed and relief at the removal of his heavy boots and Jenny's soft, cool hands on his hot face. He lay ill for 3 weeks before he began to mend, and it was another week then before he could walk out a little in the dusk and the evenings. After that, his strength returned rapidly, and it was only at the end of this long siege that he recovered his spirits. During most of this illness, he had been silent and moody. "Jenny, I'll be riding off soon," he said one evening. "I can't impose this on this good man, Andrews, much longer. I'll never forget his kindness. His wife, too. She's been good to us." "Yes, Jenny. You and I will have to say goodbye very soon." "Don't hurry away," she replied. Lately, Jenny had appeared strange to him. She had changed from a girl he used to see at Mrs. Bland's house He took her reluctance to say goodbye as another indication of regret that he must go back to the breaks. Yet somehow it made him observe her more closely. She wore a plain white dress made from material Mrs. Andrews had given her, and sleep and good food had improved her. She had been pretty out there in the outlaw den. She was more than that. But she had the same paleness, that same strained look, the dark eyes full of haunting shadows. After Dwayne's realization of the change in her, he watched her more with a growing certainty that he'd be sorry not to see her again. "It's likely we won't ever see each other again," he said. "That's strange to think of. We've been through some pretty hard days, and I seem to have known you a long time." Jenny appeared shy, almost sad, so Dwayne changed the subject to something less personal. Andrews returned one evening from several days' trip to Huntsville. "Dwayne, everybody's talking about how you cleaned up the Bland outfit," he said, "important and full of news. It's some exaggerated according to what you told me, but they sure made friends on the side of the Nueces. I reckon there ain't a town where you wouldn't find people to welcome you. Huntsville, you know, is some divide in this area. Half the people are crooked, likely enough. All of them who was loud in praise of you, the crookedest. For instance, I met King Fisher, the boss outlaw of these parts. Well, King thinks he's a decent citizen. He was telling me what a grand job of yours was for boarding honest cattlemen. Now that Bland and Alloway are done for, King Fisher will find rustling easier. There's talk of Hardin moving his camp over to Bland's, but I don't know how true that is. I reckon there ain't much to it. In the past, when a big outlaw chief went under, his band almost always broke up and scattered. There's no one left could run that outfit." "Did you hear of any outlaws hunting me?" asked Dwayne. "Nobody from Bland's outfit is hunting you, that's for sure," replied Andrews. "Fisher, and there never was a horse straddled to go on your trail. Nobody had use for Bland. Anyhow, his men would be afraid to trail you, and you could go right into Huntsville where you'd be some popular. Reckon you'd be safe, too, except when some of them fool saloon loafers or bad cowpunchers try to shoot you for the glory in it. Them kind of men will pop up everywhere you go, Dwayne." "I'll be able to ride and take care of myself in a day or two," went on Dwayne. "Then I'll go, and I'd like to talk to you about Jenny. She's welcome to home here with us." "Thank you, Andrews. You're a kind man, but I want Jenny to get farther away from the Rio Grande. She'd never be safe here. Besides, she'll be able to find relatives. She has some, though she doesn't know where they are." "All right, Drain, whatever you think is best. I reckon you better take her to some town. Go north and strike for Shelby or Crockett. Them's good towns. I'll tell you, Jenny, the names of men who'll help her. You needn't ride into town at all." "Which place is near and how far?" "Well, Shelbyville, I reckon. About 2 days' ride. Poor stock country, so you ain't liable to meet rustlers. All the same, better hit the trail at night and go careful." At sunset, 2 days later, Dwayne and Jenny mounted their horses and said goodbye to the rancher and his wife. Andrews would not listen to Dwayne's thanks. "I'll tell you I'm beholden to you yet," he declared. "Well, what can I do for you?" asked Dwayne. "I may come along here again some day." "Get down and come in, then, or you're no friend of mine. I reckon there ain't nothing I can think of. I just happen to remember." Here led Dwayne out of earshot of the women and went on a whisper. "Buck, I used to be well-to-do. Got skinned by a name named Rodney Brown. He lives in Huntsville, and he's my enemy. I never was much on fighting, or I would have fixed him. Brown ruined me, stole all I had. He's a hoss and cattle thief, and he's pull enough at home to protect him. I reckon I needn't say any more." "Is this Brown man who shot outlaw named Stevens?" queried Dwayne curiously. "Sure, he's the same. I heard that story. Brown swears he plugged Stevens through the middle. But the outlaw rode off. Nobody ever knew for sure. Luke Stevens died of that shot. I buried him," said Dwayne. Andrews made no further comment, and the two men returned to the women. The main road for about 3 miles, where it forks to the left and road and keep on straight. That's what you said, Andrews." "Sure, and good luck to you both." Dwayne and Jenny trod away into the gathering twilight, and at the moment an insistent thought bothered Dwayne. Both Luke and Stevens and the rancher Andrews had hinted to Dwayne to kill a man named Brown. Dwayne wished with all his heart that they had not mentioned it, let alone taken for granted the execution of the deed. What a bloody split pace Texas was. Men who robbed and men who were robbed both wanted murdering each other. It was in the spirit of the country. Dwayne certainly meant to avoid ever meeting this Rodney Brown, and that was the very determination, feeling of how little stood between his sane and better self and self utterly wild and terrible. He reasoned that only intelligence could save him, only a thoughtful understanding of his danger and a hold upon some ideal. Then he fell into low conversation with Jenny, holding out hopeful views of their future, and presently darkness set in. The sky was overcast with heavy clouds. There was no air moving. The heat and oppression threatened storm. By and by, Dwayne could not see a rod in front of him, though his horse had no difficulty keeping in the road. Dwayne was bothered by the blackness of night. Traveling fast was impossible, and any moment he might miss the road that led off to the left, so he was compelled to give all his attention into peering into the thick shadows ahead. As good luck would have it, he came to higher ground where there was less mesquite and therefore not such impenetrable darkness. And at this point he came to where the road split. Once he hid in the right direction, he felt easier in mind. To his annoyance, however, a fine misty rain set in. Jenny was not dressed for wet weather, and for that matter, neither was he. His coat, which in that dry, warm climate was seldom needed, was tied behind his saddle, and he put it on Jenny. They traveled on. The rain fell steadily, if anything growing thicker. Dwayne grew uncomfortably wet and chilly. Jenny, however, fared somewhat better by reason of the heavy coat. The night passed quickly despite the discomfort, and soon a gray, dismal, rainy dawn greeted the travelers. Jenny insisted that he find some shelter where he could build a fire and dry his clothes. He was not in any fit condition to risk catching a cold, and in fact, Dwayne's teeth were chattering. To find a shelter in this barren wasteland seemed a futile task. Quite unexpectedly, however, they happened upon a deserted adobe cabin situated a little bit off the road. Not only did it prove to have dry interior, but there was also some firewood. Water was available in pools everywhere. However, there was no grass for the horses. A good fire and hot food and drink changed the aspect of their condition as far as comfort went, and Jenny lay down to sleep. For Dwayne, however, there must be vigilance. His cabin was no hiding place. The rain fell harder all the time, and wind changed to the north. "It's a northerner, all right," muttered Dwayne. 2 or 3 days, and he felt his extraordinary luck had not held out. Still, one point favored him, and that was the travelers were not likely to come along during the storm. Jenny slept while Dwayne watched. The saving of this girl meant more to him than any task he ever assumed. First, it had been partly from human feeling to secure an unfortunate woman, and partly motive to establish clearly to himself that he's no outlaw. Lately, however, he'd come to a different sense, a strange one, with something personal and warm, protective in it. As he looked down upon her, a slight, slender girl with bedraggled dress and disheveled hair, her face pale and quiet, a little stern in sleep, and her long, dark lashes lying on her cheek, he seemed to see her fragility, her prettiness, her femininity never seen before. But for him, she might at the very moment have been broken, ruined girl, laying back in the cabin of the Blands. The fact gave him a feeling of importance in this shifting of her destiny. She was unharmed, still young. She would forget and be happy. She would live to be a good wife and mother somehow. The thought swelled in his heart. His act, death-dealing as it had been, was a noble one, and he helped him to hold on to his drifting hopes. Hardly since Jenny had entered into his thought had those ghosts returned to torment him. Tomorrow she'd be gone among good, kind people with the possibility of finding her relatives. He thanked God for that. Nevertheless, he felt a pang. She slept more than half a day. Dwayne kept guard, always alert, whether he was sitting, standing, or walking. The rain pattered steadily on the roof and sometimes came in gusty flurries through the door. The horses were outside in a shed that afforded poor shelter, and they stamped restlessly. Dwayne kept them saddled and bridled. About the middle of the afternoon, Jenny awoke. They cooked a meal and afterwards sat beside a little fire. She had never been, in observation of her, anything but a tragic feature. An unhappy girl, the farthest removed from serenity and poise. The characteristic capacity for agitation struck him as stronger in her this day. He attributed, however, to the long strain, the suspense nearing to an end, yet sometimes when her eyes were on him, she did not seem to be thinking of her freedom, of her future. "This time tomorrow you'll be in Cheveleyville," he said. "Where will you be?" she asked quickly. "Me? I'll be making tracks for some lonesome place." The girl shuddered. "I've been brought up in Texas. I remember what a lot of hard men of family had, but poor as they were, they had a roof over their heads, a hearth with a fire, and a warm bed, somebody to love them. And you, Dwayne, oh my God, what must your life be? You must ride and hide and watch eternally. No decent food, no pillow, no friendly word, no clean clothes, no woman's hand. Horses, guns, trails, rocks, holes, these must be important things in your life. You must go on riding, hiding, killing until you meet." She ended with a sob and dropped her head on her knees. Dwayne was amazed, deeply touched. "My girl, thank you for that thought of me," he said with a tremor in his voice. "You don't know how much that means to me." She raised her face, and it was tear-stained, eloquent and beautiful. "I heard tell the best of men go bad out there. You won't. Promise me you won't. I never knew any man like you. We'll never see each other again after today. I'll never forget you. I'll pray for you. And I'll never give up trying to do something. Don't despair. It's never too late. It's my hope. It's kept me alive. Out there at Bland's before you came, I was only a poor little weak girl. But if I could hope, so can you. Stay away from those men. Be a lone wolf. Fight for your life. Stick out your exile. Maybe someday." And she lost her voice. Dwayne clasped her hand with feeling as deep as hers and promised to remember her words. In her despair for him, she had spoken wisdom, pointed out only the course. Dwayne's vigilance, momentarily broken by emotion, had no sooner reasserted itself than he discovered the bay horse, the one Jenny rode, had broken his halter and gone off. The soft, wet earth had deadened the sound of his hoofs. His tracks were plain in the mud. There were clumps of mesquite in sight, among which the horse might have strayed. It turned out, however, that he had not done so. Dwayne didn't want to leave Jenny alone in the cabin so near the road, so he put her up on his horse and bade her to follow. The rain had ceased for the time being anyway, and though evidently the storm wasn't over, the tracks led up the wash to a wide flat where mesquite and prickly pear and thornbush grew so thickly that Jenny couldn't ride into it. Dwayne was thoroughly concerned. He must have her horse. Time was flying. It could soon be night. He could not expect her to scramble quickly through the brake on foot. Therefore, he decided to risk leaving her at the edge of the thicket and go it alone. As he went in, a sound startled him. It was the breaking of a branch. He stepped on her, thrust aside. He heard the impatient pound of a horse's hoof. Then it was all quiet. Still he listened, not wholly satisfied. He was never satisfied in regard to safety. He knew all too well that there never could be safety for him in this country. The bay horse had threaded the aisles of the thicket. Dwayne wondered what had drawn him in there. Certainly it had not been grass, and there was none. Presently he heard the horse tramping along, and then he ran. The mud was deep, and the sharp thorns made going difficult. He came up with the horse, and at the same moment crossed a multitude of fresh horse tracks. He bent lower to examine them, and was alarmed to find that they had been made very recently, even since it had ceased raining. There were tracks of well-shod horses. Dwayne straightened up with a cautious glance all around. His instant decision to hurry back to Jenny, but he had come on a goodly way through the thicket, and it was impossible to rush back. Once or twice he imagined he heard crashing his brush, but did not halt to make sure. Certain he was now that some kind of danger threatened. Suddenly there came unmistakable thump of horses' hooves somewhere to and fro. Then a scream went in the air. It ended abruptly. Dwayne leaped forward, tore his way through the thorny brake. He heard Jenny cry again. An appealing call quickly hushed. It seemed more to his right, and he plunged that way. He burst into a glade where a smoldering fire on the ground covered up with footprints and tracks showed the campers had been lately. Rushing across this, he broke his passage out into the open, but he was too late. His horse had disappeared. Jenny was gone. There were no riders in sight. There was no sound. There was heavy trail horses going north. Jenny had been carried off, probably by outlaws. Dwayne realized the pursuit was out of the question, and that Jenny was lost.